Okay,
Cool. It's recording now.
we're live.
All right. Welcome back, guys, to our Metamula podcast,
Episode 2.
number 2.
It's,
Numero
it's
dos.
called it's called Metamula Hangout, right?
Oh, yeah. That's right. We
Metamula
decided
Hangout number 2.
hanging out.
Yeah,
Although it's
just
not
kicking it.
Google Hangout. We're using a different software.
Not
yeah.
sponsored.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
yeah, let's get started.
Okay.
So how did your day go today?
It's pretty good. I woke up kind of late today, later than I anticipated. I wanted to wake up at 8, but since we were talking pretty late yesterday, right?
Yeah.
I didn't go to sleep until 2 something.
Right.
So I woke up, a few hours later than that.
Cool.
Yeah. So I had less daylight to work with. It was good. Other than that, I did some stuff.
Nice. So so I guess we can talk about the topic today. Do you what was the topic that we wanted to talk about today? Or did you have something specific that you want to talk about?
Well, earlier today, I was thinking about the Pareto Principle.
Okay.
And how it's sort of one of the more fundamental topics of what I consider the metagame.
Right.
And yeah, so I can elaborate more on that.
All right, let's start with that
and
then.
Maybe explore the idea further. Okay, let's just jump right into it. So, Pareto Principle, for people that haven't heard about it, it's basically the 80-20 rule.
Right.
It's not exactly the 80-20 rule, but it essentially is. And the Pareto Principle is basically the square root of the number of people in a given group or organization produces 50% of the output.
Oh, is that right? I thought it was 80-20. But that's how it pulls out.
It's essentially 80-20. 80-20
you're looking at the graph.
Is 80% of the work is produced by 20% of the effort that you put in, or 20% of the time you spent on doing that work, or let's say 80% of the wealth in the given group is owned by 20%. And that's similar. I'm not sure which one people have heard of more, but it's basically the same. The same idea.
Right.
I use the square root because it's interesting to think about. So that means in, let's say, if you have a group of 10 people, that means 3 people in that group will be producing 50% of the output. So that's not too bad, 3 is only 2 away from 5.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this square root law is that once you get to 100 people, then only 10 people produce 50% or own 50% when you're talking about income or assets. And then if you have 1,000, that's only 30, 31, 32 people. 10,000, that's only 100 people that has 50%, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Once you extrapolate that to an even larger scale, you can kind of see how the 1% is just prevalent across the world.
That's crazy.
And so the really fascinating thing about the Pareto Principle to me is its pervasiveness in the universe. I was gonna say the world, as in this earth, but it's the fucking universe. It kind of characterizes it predicts the mass of stars in the universe.
How's it all?
10 stars in 100 has 50% of the total mass.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Really?
And yeah, and even let's say it's even trippier when you talk about let's see word frequency, the frequency that a word in a language appears in text.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what language it is, it follows the Pareto principle.
Really?
And it's this graph. It is really really weird. It's I would say it's a natural law. I'm
Yeah,
not sure
it's
if there
kind
are
of
any
like,
requirements
yeah,
for something to be qualified to be a natural
yeah,
law, but it's pretty much a natural law if it applies to so many things.
right.
And so that means, that makes me think about how the more progressive groups in our country are talking about like equal opportunity, which is
Mm-hmm.
great. But then when a lot of people are arguing about the 1% and how they have so much money and so much power, and they want to like bring that down and even out the playing field a bit, um, then one has to be careful of how you approach that problem. Because one, of course, that's a problem because this sort of distribution can become tyrannical very quickly. If the rich get richer, the more powerful get more power,
Mm-hmm.
and it just exacerbates, and it tends to have it has a tendency to run and get out of control.
Yeah.
So that's something to be careful about and something that we would have to be mindful of and try to contain. But on the other hand, we have to address it in a way that makes sense. Because if the Pareto principle is so pervasive, it just happens no matter what, then it doesn't matter what system of government or what system of economics you apply to the group. It's always going to redistribute in that same model,
Right.
right? So let's say like because America is really capitalistic economically. Let's say we somehow gathered everyone, tore the economic system down, and became really socialist or communist.
Mm-hmm.
The wealth distribution is going to redistribute in that same way. I think that's my theory.
You mean back to the
Because
capitalistic?
yeah, back to that same trend, the same looking graph
I see.
where 80% has or 20% of the people has the 80%.
I mean, even in communist country like China, if I
Mm-hmm.
bet if you measure the financial distribution,
Yeah,
it's still gonna
it's
be
really
like,
apparent for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because actually, like, the recent book I read, Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, the
Mm-hmm.
founder of Nike.
Mm-hmm.
So towards the end of the book, he mentions like after like 14 years or like almost, I forgot how many years, but so after they actually did an IPO, right, in their initial public offering, and they had like tens of thousands of employees, right, and a lot of them were factory workers in China, right. So, but since they did the initial public offering, they were like very rich. They had a lot of money, so they had enough money to give out minimum wage to all of their employees regardless of what country they were living in, right?
Like U.S. minimum wage.
Yeah, U.S. minimum wage, right? But they were
Mm-hmm.
okay with that, and he wanted to do that. But
Mm.
when he offered to do that to the Chinese factory workers, the government stepped in and said, "Don't do this. You cannot do this in our country because a factory worker cannot make more than a doctor make, right?" So back
Mm.
then, you can imagine this was like back in like the 80s, right? So you can
Whoa.
imagine like the daily income for average Chinese person was like $2, maybe less, right?
Okay.
And then they're talking about giving them an hourly rate of like $3,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can imagine
Wow.
like how that would just kind of like flip their economy around and like
Yeah.
just and nobody would become a doctor, nobody want to become like a manufacturer or engineer, a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
They'll all want to just work at a factory, and that'll just completely like disturb their whole economy. right?
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Wow. And back then, like way back in the day, I'm a little bit unfamiliar with how people were paid a few
mhm.
decades ago in China, but was it kind of similar across the board? Like you didn't make that much more as a doctor, if not the same, in China?
Um, I mean, I think they did get paid significantly more than a
Okay,
factory worker,
I
right?
see.
But just getting paid $3 an hour compared to like, like $1 or something, you
Hmm.
get paid daily, you're getting paid like over 10x, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, like over 20x, like your income just overnight. So, the buying power, the spending power is gonna just go insane, right?
Hmm.
So, and that was like a very interesting thing to think about where like um in a communist country I realized even though they don't want to be a communist country, it's just like they're kind of like stalemate in that position. Even the leaders would want to like upbring their whole economic system, like how do you do that to a billion citizens, right, where they're already kind of confined to this society with their economic system, right? So I think that's why like politics and economics gets very like difficult, right? And that's why like presidents have to be so fucking smart to solve these things out and trying to make things work for different societies. And looking at the U.S. currently is very interesting. Like you mentioned, like there's all this different politics and political views and parties and groups forming, and like it's just weird how like you said, once you kind of force the U.S. economy to go a certain way, it'll just normalize back to how it was because that's just how our society and our economic system is, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So I thought that's a very
Yeah,
interesting point.
it is thinking about the interplay between a country's political system and their economic system.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of countries have their own unique blend, their own unique version of it, and
Yeah.
how that interacts with the rest of the world. It is interesting to see how it plays out, especially
Yeah.
the case of China. Is almost hyperbole, not hyperbole. What is that term when it's like
Complete
kind of like
opposite.
ironic? Yeah, it's like they're kind of contradictory. There you go.
Contradictory. Yeah.
They're contradictory, the political and economic system. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I mean,
Yeah.
their economic system is working out for them in the past 2 decades.
Yeah, for sure. I
Um,
mean, there.
so
Yeah.
and I don't think there has been an example of this type of mix. And yeah, it would be kind of crazy to see how they deal with that and the rapid growth that they have and the growing influence that they have with the rest of the world. But going back to the whole talk about Pareto Principle,
Hmm.
is that I think people need to be more careful when pushing certain ideas and agendas.
Mm.
And and I'm not saying this as if I'm like a super conservative guy, like leave everything the same. What I'm saying is that we can't just fix the problem by like flipping the board over and restarting.
Right.
Because I bet there's a lot of people in this country that, in many other countries, but this country specifically, that are just fed up with how much wealth and power the top echelons have. They would
Yeah.
rather just flip the board and rebuild again.
But again,
Rebuild,
yeah.
and with maybe their with more of their ideals set up so
Yeah.
that it can run in a way that they think is going to be more equal.
Right.
But if Pareto principle holds true, it doesn't really matter what system you put in, it's going to happen.
I do
So I guess
100%.
yeah. So then that means if it's inevitable, right? And I'm going to assume that it is for most things in this world. So if it's going to be inevitable, then what can we do about it? Right? Then that means if it's going to distribute itself in this way economically,
Yeah.
in terms of wealth and power, then I guess our government would have to have systems in place to, they're kind of like fail safes,
Yeah.
where it does not, like, it holds the system from going too far on either end. So then so you adjust the system in a way that you get as little amount of people that's dispossessed and as little people who have crazy amounts of power, and those that do can somehow contribute to keeping the system more stable.
Yeah. Well, I think that's I don't really like the fact that we're kind of like exemplifying politics, because it's just like politics is always like a nasty can of worm to open, right?
Yes.
But
Yeah, for sure.
it's like something we're talking about the other day. It's like my belief is, and I think people are gonna disagree, but it's you rich will get richer because they already learned, they knew everything how to get rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the
Mm-hmm.
other hand, in the other side is what I call complainers, right? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
they're fighting for equality, like we want to flip the board over and start over. But like you said, if we flip the board over, it's inevitable that these rich people get richer because they already know how to get rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I told you, like last night, if if you take away everything that a person knows, they will still retain what they know, the information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's like
That's true.
I know how to post flyers. I'm not embarrassed about doing that. I know how to grind. I know how to you know do manual labor to work a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
So rich people, even though they look rich and they look like they're just like sitting on top of money, they have all of these habits and experiences embedded into their self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like a person that's just like complaining over equality, right? So, um, in a sense, it's hard to achieve equality because like people only focus on like the monetary and materialistic equality, where I think that's just a result of um, the inequality of self experience and habits and knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like
Yeah.
the people that who are arguing for equality should really like strongly focus on the equal habit or equal knowledge as well, right? Because like if you flip the board over and like kind of spread out and give equal amount of money to like homeless people, drug addicts, rich people, right? What do you think they're gonna do? They're gonna do what they always do: go get more drugs, right? And then that'll just kind of like you said, go back to that same um, graph of how the Pareto Principle works, right?
Yeah, I think
Um,
the wealth will redistribute in a similar fashion, especially for people who've built their own wealth. That means they've learned all of the tools that
yeah,
they needed to have to be able to build that wealth in the first place. Maybe
yeah,
we'll get rid of some folks that are old money that had it
yeah,
passed down, but even then, they will still have a network that they can
yeah,
use and utilize to come up ahead again.
exactly. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like that's another example that I kind of like to use from the book, "The Laws of Human Nature" by Robert Greene. He
Mm-hmm.
talks about like how your experience is just like not as short as you think. Like if you're 20 years old or 30 years old, your life is not just based on that 30 years of your life. Like all your habits and all your genes and all your thoughts and experiences are accumulation of your generations and generations passed down, right?
Wow, so
So
it's
like
literally hundreds of thousands of years old,
yeah, so
or
what
tens
your
of
grandpa
thousands.
did as his daily job and what he thought and what the emotional things that he felt, it all somehow transferred into your parents, and then they had their own experience based on that, and then that gets transferred to you, right?
Okay.
So you also have your own experiences, but it's all impacted by like the way your generation kind of grew up. So
Mm.
even if you kind of again flip the board over and redistribute the wealth, like these old money as you call it, like like even though like some new millennial, you know, that's part of the old money family might not be smart as you, because their daily habits and um, network is so much more powerful than an average person, right?
Mm.
Like they talk about much more grand type of things in their family, and
Mm-hmm.
like how they talk about money will be different. So um, it's just like they're more privileged in that sense, right? To have those
Yeah.
experiences like early on. That's what I
Yeah.
believe, and I'm definitely for like equalizing that aspect, and that's why I feel like my goal is becoming more clear as we do this podcast, that I want to distribute like wealth as not materialistic wealth, but like education and knowledge as a wealth, right?
Mm.
So if you can teach people how to be wealthy, right, then they can actually take that information and start doing it and
Yeah.
start earning
That's
wealth.
definitely worth more than the dollar amount of money.
Yeah,
Like
and especially again,
if you
you want
spend
to, yeah,
like if
you
you
want to
spend a
pass
thousand
down.
dollars on something that teaches you an important skill that allows you to build a company, that thousand
Yeah,
dollars is way worth it.
yeah, over time, like you're not spending $1,000 just for that one single experience. People,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm a guilty of this too. Like it took me a lot of tries to understand this psychologically. Like spending money on non-materialistic things that are kind of like more experienced, it kind of
Hmm.
carries with you for a long time, and it
Hmm.
goes on top of it. So
Yeah,
that
becomes a part of
it's
you. You
yeah,
build yourself up from these pieces that you accrue by spending time and money to gather them.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
man,
very
I'm all
interesting.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, um, before we stray away from politics, I just
yeah.
wanted to preface I have like very limited knowledge about politics in general.
Oh,
So,
same.
I
Yeah,
pretty much have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about.
yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
will
I think
say that I just want to say that people should be careful about what we lobby for and what we're asking
yeah,
for and petitioning for,
yeah,
because not everything is so clear cut. If things are not equal, how do we make it equal? It's not that
yeah.
simple, right? It's always a balance of things.
Right.
Going tilting the scale the other way is not going to help.
Yeah.
Might even make it worse.
I think this is part of politics. Like politics is like it's political science, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's a science between like people and their relationship and their views, right?
Mm.
So everybody's
Yeah.
gonna have their own separate views, but the meta game is like the people at the top understand the movement of like this mass views in our society, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um,
Yeah, and it's
that's
kind
what's
of crazy
interesting.
how our media shines the spotlight, um, in terms of political discussions. They always kind of tune to the extreme 5 to 10% of each camp. Let's say in the U.S. we have the left and the right, and the discussions that we're having and the people that are being interviewed. A lot of the times they're on the far left or the far right, and then they fight back and forth, and it's I guess it's good television. It's
Yeah,
dynamic, and people can argue really in heated debates, but without each other listening to one another, which is kind of
yeah.
frustrating to watch. I don't think I have
Well,
sat through one in a really long
I
time,
think was it
because I think
Shakespeare?
most people are
Yeah,
moderate, right? At least
yeah,
most educated people are very moderate, and they can sit down and think about the problem in a more comprehensive way. And
yeah,
when I think by the very nature of doing that, gives you less conviction.
yeah, for sure,
So then,
one
with
hundred
less
percent.
conviction, you're less likely to go on the screen and just put your foot down and promote completely your camp and your ideologies.
Yeah,
As a an educated, reasonable person, you would expect that person to be, oh, well, like, this is what I believe, but I can see how the other side would have that perspective. That doesn't work too well in
yeah,
debates nowadays for some reason. I don't know. I don't know if it's because our collective intelligence is going down or collective sophistication is declining. And that's just
Yeah,
unfortunate because I think
I was
it's
just
a
thinking
much
that.
more compelling argument for me personally if a person has a stance but is able to step into the opposition's shoes and consider it in their perspective, because that
Hmm.
tells me that, hey, this guy has the acuity to consider the opposition, and after considering it is able to come up with rationalizations of why he chose his stand. It's like, okay, this guy knows a little bit more of what he's talking about, and he's thought a little bit more deeply than someone just picking a camp and painting their faces red or blue and going
Yeah,
all out.
yeah. I mean, I think it's usually because of like, so okay. First thing what I realize is like, I think we do like a common knowledge, right? So it's like, because like the world evolves so fast, there's so many people, information takes time to travel, right? And everybody like form their own opinion and knowledge. And second part is that people are influenced by their direct environments and peers, right? So your political views are probably going to be similar to the average of like 10 people around you, right? And you're probably not even going to know why you're arguing for equality. And some of us, like inside, you're kind of like, oh, equal rights, but you have no idea why you're doing that inside, right? And especially for younger people, I think it's true. So because you haven't experienced long enough life to understand like what's good for both sides, right? So for
Yeah, that's very true.
taking an example of me, like I thought I was always like in a Democratic Party or side because I grew up very poor when I first moved to America, right? So I benefited a lot from the democratic like laws and bills that the presidents passed, right? And then as I kind of like became more educated through school and I got a job and I went higher up on the like tax bracket, I'm just all like Republican, capitalistic, you know. So it's like, yeah. So based on your experiences and your environment, your views might change, and what
Mm.
you benefit from the parties might change, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it goes to like I'm not saying which either party. There's no either right or wrong party because like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying people who are like in Democratic Party is wrong. Like I could have been in that stuck in that lifestyle for a long time. I would have still argued for Democratic party, right? Because I would
Mm-hmm.
benefit more from that type of thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's more about like how do we co-live with these different ideas, right?
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
think,
And yeah, how do we
yeah,
take care of everybody the best we can?
yeah, and it becomes with I think the important thing is like self-awareness. Like you said, it's not we shouldn't like just react to what people are saying because of like our views are different, but oftentimes we react because we get this feeling of this guy is opposing me, so I have to tell him my point of view, right?
Mm.
But I think if people are like a little bit more self-aware of that feeling and kind of recognize, oh, why is this guy like saying this, right? Instead of like trying to like deny and oppose him right away, like try to understand like what the
Mm.
side is doing and
Mm-hmm.
what that side is feeling. I think that would be like the better way to move forward, as Andrew Yang says. It's not left
Oh.
or right, move forward, right?
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And it's tough to do in the moment, I think, for a lot of people, especially if you are really if you have a certain level of conviction for your team and somebody is wearing the other team's colors.
yeah.
And it relates to what were talking about last time,
Hmm.
on the last episode, of stepping outside of yourself
Yeah.
so that you can look at everything logically and see the emotional reaction that you're having inside your head, but not act on it, and think more logically about the situation and consider the other person's perspective.
Mm. Yeah.
So and also our discussion about the balance too, where balance is so important. It's very important for me, at the very least,
Yeah.
because like politically speaking, I'm definitely liberal. I think because I really believe in human rights and equality, and I want to talk a little bit more about equality
Uh-oh.
in a bit, because there's different kinds of equality. We have to be very careful about
Hello?
what kind of equality we're talking about. Hello?
Cool.
Go.
All right.
Okay.
We're back.
All right. Sorry about that. I think my Wi-Fi cut out. I'm not sure if it's because of the fire that's going on around in Northern California, or AT&T sucks, or my laptop is slowly dying. But we're back.
Cool. We're back.
What were we
All
talking
right.
about? We were
Um,
discussing about.
yeah, so we're just talking about the whole politics, the left and the rightist.
Oh yeah, left
Right.
and the right. Be careful of what you I guess push out, the agendas that you try to push out. Make sure you understand the ramifications of the policies that you want to take effect, and also a balance is really important.
So I'm curious, like, okay, go ahead. Yeah, finish your thought.
I was just gonna say I think it's pretty apparent that it's never good to go in extreme one way or the other. Most of the times I say a good balance is the way.
Okay, I see. So I was just curious, like, so you had this thought about Pareto Principle, like, but why were you thinking about this, like, in what context?
Okay. Well, I was thinking about metamula in our
Yeah,
metagame discussions,
yeah,
and since Pareto Principle is so pervasive, I keep using that word. I should get more vocabulary in my vernacular. But
pervasive,
since pervasive, I like that word. Since it
especially
happens so much and everywhere,
doesn't spreading widely throughout an area or a group of people.
yeah, like since it's so widespread,
Yeah.
that means it's it's almost pointless to try to avoid it. You shouldn't.
Oh, the Pareto Principle, you mean?
Yeah, because it's
Okay.
going to happen. So let's say in the context of making money, starting a business, or just being successful in your career, the
Yeah.
Pareto Principle is going to be there, and it's going to have its effect in your life, in the reality that you're living in. So given that, and you can't change it, then I think it becomes important to come up with a structure so you can play the meta game instead of playing
Oh,
everybody else's game. Because if you play everybody else's game at the same level, then you're just going to be at the mercy of the Pareto Principle. You're going
right.
to be far more likely to be in the 80% group that has 20% of the resources, and each fighting over that little 20%, while the top 20 enjoy the rest of the 80.
Interesting.
Right? Unless you're truly exceptional, but then like the truly exceptional are the ones that I think are able to figure out the metagame.
Right.
Because if the meta game is a level or several levels above the standard rules, that means there's going to be a small percentage of people that are following that structure, and that means they understand the metagame. So then it's important for us to act in that way in order to escape the Pareto Principle, so to say.
Right.
Yeah. So what do you think
I
about
guess
that concept?
I guess in a sense it's like going back to the whole politics talk. In a sense, the way I see it is like arguing for equality is like you're arguing against the Pareto Principle, right?
It depends, because so there's from what I've consumed from speakers and other people who speak about politics, there are
Yeah.
two main types of equality.
Okay.
There's equality of outcome and equality of opportunity. and they're similar in, I guess, in wording. They
Equality of
might sound like
outcome
similar,
and
yeah. Equality of outcome and equality of opportunity.
okay.
They're very different things once you kind of explore that concept. The equality of outcome is saying that we should have the same outcome for everybody all across the board.
Okay.
And with and that's
Uh,
with every with every stratification of people that you can possibly determine, meaning like affirmative action.
mhm.
Affirmative action is a form of equality of outcome, where you
Oh,
try
I see.
to ensure equality in the end distribution, where you have, let's say, in a job, like in a company, all the employees should be 50% men and 50% women, because in our society we have 50% men and 50% women. And let's
Right.
say there's like 12% Asian in this city, and that means for this company they'll need to have 12% Asians in the
Right.
company.
Right.
And so and like basically the full form of equality of outcome is to ensure that.
Interesting.
But then if you just go a little bit deeper, then it becomes apparent that it's almost impossible to do so, and unrealistic, and also just it's not going to work. Right?
Right.
Because then if you try to enforce that, you're slowly going to forego talent. You're going to forego why they were considered for the position in the first place, say from a hiring perspective.
Mhm.
If you're hiring for a position and you have one spot because somebody left, and then you're only able to hire a very specific type of person, like a very specific
Right.
demographic,
Right.
and it's almost impossible to have these categories, because like
Yeah. How
because
do you
of course equality of outcome comes from a good place, right? It wants to treat everybody the same, and it wants to make sure that everybody is treated equally. I think it comes from a feeling that everyone should have the same opportunities, and if everyone has had the same opportunities, they would arrive at the same place. But that's just not the case. And also, I was talking about gender, male and female, and then there's race. Well, what about intelligence? Someone's IQ, and
right.
and we can talk about how effective IQ is at predicting someone's intellectual ability, but I think there's definitely a strong correlation, right? And do we categorize people in IQ brackets, like
Right.
90s versus hundreds versus 110s, and making
Right.
sure that in every company we have a representation of all this distribution of IQs?
Yeah.
And for men's IQ distribution is flatter than that of women, and we have to account for that. And then let's say, what about mixed people, if they're like half Hispanic and half like black, and where do they fit in this hierarchy, and what percentage of representation should they have in the company, representation they should have in the media, things like that. It's almost impossible to make sure you have that because of how multivariate a problem this is.
Right. There's just too many variables to
Yeah, there's too many variables, and two, the more you try to dig deep into that, the more the you disregard the talents and the capabilities that this person has to be able to be in that position in the first place.
yeah, right. Exactly. So that's so interesting
Right.
how like
So then that's something
yeah.
that I think people need to be careful of, because I know definitely that old Jason, like back in the day when I was younger, much younger, in high school maybe, I would definitely think, okay, like equality of outcomes sounds like it would make sense, like everyone should have the opportunity to be at the same place or a certain place in life or in
Yeah.
society. and everybody should be treated equally.
Right.
But equality outcome doesn't ensure that everyone gets treated equally.
Yeah. I mean, is
Yeah.
there like exactly? That's why
So
I'm
that's something
curious.
that, yeah, that's something to be mindful of, because it sounds good, just these three words, equality of outcome. Well, it sounds good, but
Yeah.
once you start thinking about it a little bit and really distill it to I guess the mathematical model that it represents, it's just not going to be even fathomable,
Mm,
I think. Um, on the other hand, equality of opportunity, they're both forms of equality, but I think equality of opportunity, when done correctly, can have a good foundational place in our society.
mm.
And that's making sure that we all have the opportunities that are inherent of being a citizen here.
I mean,
And
I
if we
think
could somehow ensure
it's
that, I
yeah,
think that would be a good system to have.
yeah. We are beginning to like move or change towards that when it comes to the opportunity, right? A lot of
Mm-hmm.
companies, the hiring metrics, and they all try to consider equal opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah.
definitely. There's different programs and initiatives that are aiming to help people overcome certain barriers that have been set up,
Hmm.
um, intentionally or unintentionally in our society. Kind of like, I think FAFSA is possibly one form of equality of
Mm,
opportunity, where because colleges are going to be expensive and it's getting more and more expensive every year,
yeah,
that's a big hurdle and a big obstacle for a lot of people, and to make sure that all students, all capable students, have the chance to go to a university, I think is a good thing.
I definitely benefited
Yeah.
from FAFSA, so
Mm-hmm.
that
Same.
was like, yeah,
Me too. It has helped me tremendously,
hmm,
so I'm really grateful for that.
yeah,
Yeah, and then that kind of touches on the discussion about tuition in colleges and what how that money is being used, and the bloat that is in the public university systems is just, it's kind of crazy,
yeah.
but we don't
Do
have
you
to
know?
go into that today.
Yeah, we don't have to go into that today,
Yeah,
but
that's a whole
it,
big monster to talk about.
it's interesting. You know why
Mm-hmm.
education system was created in America, right? Like schools,
Mm.
like
I'm not sure,
you don't know.
like,
So
why the educational system was created in America.
yeah, so
Mm-mm.
school became because of after the Industrial Revolution,
Mm.
um, there was a lot of factories going up, right?
Oh, okay,
And
I
and a
see.
lot of people were just like dying because like they don't know how to like use this machinery.
Mm.
So the way the classroom is designed is it's just like a factory worker. Like it's
Mm.
in lines, right?
It's in rows and
It's in
columns.
rows and columns,
Yeah, so
right? And
and students get a number too.
yeah, and
I
you
had a
get a roll
student
call.
number.
Yeah, so the current education system was developed for, not purpose of education. So, the curriculum, and you can tell like the curriculum is more general in the young age because you're
Mm.
just trying to educate them to, generally um, educated about just doing their, task at hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we've past like 40, 50 years, I don't think we've kind of just going through the education system and looking back,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've changed a lot or we've like really um, modified the system in a way it's really beneficial for the education, right?
Right. Yeah. I would
Yeah,
venture to say almost 100 years, thinking about
that's yeah,
industrial revolution wise.
right.
100 years, which is kind of insane, and it makes sense. And I definitely have heard of the
Yeah,
argument that, well, not the argument, but the concept that
yeah,
our public school systems in general in the U.S. is
yeah,
designed in the industrial era
yeah,
and designed to churn out kids who are going to thrive in that environment,
yeah,
being able to receive instruction properly and do what you are told and complete tasks, earn your
yeah,
points, and
exactly.
move up the ladder, aka grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
yeah. One oh,
it's
that reminds me. A really, really funny parallel is that I think this was in middle school. It was either late middle school or early high school. We did an exercise. Might have been in high school, um, government class, but we did an exercise about I think Andrew Carnegie
mhm,
and how he I don't know what the proper term is, but verticalization of of the industry,
okay,
of the steel industry,
okay,
that, and also there also, I mean, I'm digressing, but the exercise we did was we were split up into teams, and one team is supposed to make this origami thing, and every person makes it from beginning to end, set it aside, and grab a new sheet of paper, beginning to end, set it aside,
oh, okay,
right? And
yeah,
then the other team will do it factory line style
yeah,
with the bell. I mean, just like you do one thing, pass it down, do one thing, pass it down,
yeah,
and yeah, and obviously the team number two got way more products finished.
right,
And I remember being as a teenager like, oh, this makes sense. Yeah,
yeah.
cool. Like, yeah, go go
That's
industrial process. And
that's really cool. Yeah,
now thinking back, it's like, yeah, it makes. I mean, it's cool that we learned the effects of specialization in that regard. But it's kind of funny how in high school we're literally being taught the industrial way.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I guess
instead of
that is
now.
education. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it is fun. I mean, in the context of U.S. government and in that period of our history, that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah, basically, that's basically why education was developed, and um, yeah. So I think one of the topics that we talked about was um, like the common knowledge, like why people have separate views, and this kind of goes back to the topic that I kind of wanted to touch on, which was like books, like the discovery of books that
Mm,
I've had recently,
okay. Oh, yes. Right.
right?
Yeah,
So
I'm excited about that too.
yeah, so I think the reason why that we have such disparity between knowledge nowadays is because we have so many, well, we don't have common education, like the whole education system, right? We have common education in a sense like they educating us for this factory work, right? So we aren't taught how to have political views or systematic of views like philosophy, science, right? A little bit, but like more general knowledge enough so that you don't kill yourself in a factory. And recently, a few days ago, I discovered um, that basically, like back in the days, the books were for privileged and wealthy people, right? And that's how they passed down knowledge in their generation, or I guess in a wealthy family, that's how they transfer knowledge, right?
Mm,
And only the wealthy people were able to write books, or even have the ability to express their mind, right? So some of the great minds that come to mind is like Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, right? The
mm-hmm.
old like scientists. Well, these guys are so smart. Like they had so much time and um, just leisure to think about all these different topics that they were like multi-talented people. Like they were scientists, mathematician, engineer, inventor, economist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just the other day, I was talking to a coworker about Alexander Hamilton. So I look up like Alexander Hamilton on Wikipedia, and also like our founding fathers just 200 years ago. These guys were also very very smart people. They were like a general. They were an economist. They're a writer. They're a scientist. They're
Mm-hmm.
multiple. They're well rounded in multiple
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah, they're
And I
rock
realized like,
stars.
yeah, I was like, what the heck? Like how did these guys achieve so much? Like, and I'm a tech guy. I'm an engineer, so in the 21st century, we have so much information, we have fast internet, but it seems like we can't like hold one job or one expertise on an average person, right? We still struggle to do this. When back in the days,
Mm-hmm.
they were writing letters and shipping it off to on a horse or a carriage, right? Yet they were able to achieve so much, and I was just kind of like going down this rabbit hole, and I discovered Mortimer Adler. A he's like an American philosopher and an educator. I think he was born in around like 1900s, right? And like we died in like 2000. I discovered him through a book called How to Read a Book, right? So
Mm.
he talks about like how an average person doesn't really know how to read a book, and there's different levels of reading a book. We could get on
Mm-hmm.
that topic more um, as we go on, but a lot of people that just go through a book, um, reading the book in a very scheme. I think the method is like kind of like skimming. So you don't really attain a lot of the information because you take too long to read the book. So then, like when by the time you come back to it, you lose context of what you
Mm.
read, right?
Okay. Yeah,
And
that happens to me sometimes when I'm like on chapter two. It's like, oh, what was chapter
yeah,
one again?
yeah, right. And then after like you finish the book like 6 months later, you're like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
finished this book. Like it's in my library, and you never look at it again, right? And
True. Yeah.
that's also a very wrong way to do it. He also talks about how you should read the book multiple times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's several reasons why you should do this too. It's because it will help you map out what the author is talking about in the previous context when you go back to it, and
Mm.
also is so that like when you read the same book throughout the generation, throughout the time, your experience, as we talked about earlier, your experience changes as you go through your life. You could have a democratic view first and a republic view. So once you read the book throughout this experience, you'll begin to realize like, oh, maybe I was reading the book in wrong context. So, um,
Mm.
and that goes to say like the more of like an analytical reading level that Adler talks about, which is you want to read the book in the same level where the author wants you to understand the book, right? So a lot of
Okay.
times people read the book in a sense like how they want to take it. They just read those words and then they say, "Oh, this probably means this," right?
Mm.
They try to like overgeneralize and summarize what the author's trying to say when the author's trying to
Okay.
say, and he picked specific words to describe certain situation and experiences to get that across to you.
Mm.
So if you miss that, then you're not really taking that transfer of knowledge,
Mm.
effectively, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's different habits and ways to do this, which is kind of um, you should you should definitely read hardcover over Kindle or digital books because it will help you to jot down notes onto the hardcover and take notes onto the um, the side or the edges of the page,
Mm.
right? That'll help
Mm-hmm.
you out, right? It's
Yeah,
really
that helps
about,
me for sure.
yeah, and you can
Mm.
highlight it directly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are a
Yeah.
couple things. You could get into more of that later, um, in a different topic, or you can take a look at the book. It's really amazing. Um, and then the
Okay.
final level of reading the book is more. I forgot the word he called it. It's sequent. I forget the word, but basically what he wants us to do is to pretty much um, like conjure all of this different type of books and context and bring it together into a a like uh, joined knowledge, right? So
Mm.
so what I'm
Okay.
trying to say is that when an author reads the book, he wrote the book based on his knowledge and information attained from reading different books and different experiences, right? So once you start to read more different diverse type of books, you will start to map like the content in this book with a different content you take from another book,
Mm,
and you start to realize, oh, this is the experience or example he's using in this era, right?
mm-hmm.
Like an author could be talking about like Julius Caesar's um, death as like to explain like this is a very simple example, which is like betrayal, right? So that's
Mm,
like a very simple thing, but you have to take a look and understand what the author is trying to get across you using all this different type of example. And if you don't know the examples that this author is using, then you're not understanding what this book is trying to say to you, right? So
okay.
you can't really fully say that you read the book if you only understand like two examples out of like 100 that the author put in there, right?
I see. Okay. Huh. That makes sense because wait, so what you're saying is when an author publishes a book, it is essentially a distillation of his ideas on this certain topic, give from his from his collection of the knowledge that he's obtained by reading other books and receiving other instruction.
Right.
Distills that into this volume, and in this
Yeah.
book it'll have references to these different sources,
Right.
references to these different ideas, and
Yeah.
and for a person to be able to fully understand that book has to have some sort of at least some understanding of these other references, at least a good
Yeah.
amount of
Right.
this network of books
Yep.
to make sense. That makes total sense because we do that with Wikipedia.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
It's
read a
it's a link,
Wikipedia
right?
article and I
Yeah.
click on the link. I have like by the second paragraph, I already have 5 new tabs open because I'm gonna
Yeah.
check out what these are. So I read those things. So I can fully understand
Yeah.
this entry.
So I kind of like kind of went off tangent a little bit, but that was just to set the background of like the whole common knowledge is that
Mm,
um people nowadays that are arguing for all these different political views and things, I don't think we lack a common knowledge, which means like
mm,
we lack reading the common fundamental books that why these political views, why who created politics, right?
mm,
So there's fundamental books on like why political systems work, why nations grow, why some politics work in certain environment, right? Like
mm,
I think Aristotle, Plato and Aristotle, like they debated a lot about that in their books, right?
mm-hmm.
And so if we were taught these things, um, I mean these are very very advanced readings. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's probably the reason why it's kind of difficult to get it across as a common knowledge. Like I said, it was a very privileged thing um, to have books and read books and
Yeah.
be educated back in the days. So in a sense, I think even the people the it's kind of hard to say like the average intellect is high, but the quality of intellect is low in modern society. I think you can
Mm.
say, because
Becomes watered down.
there's a lot of junk involved. Everybody speaks English, but it's spread with like junk media, like
Ah.
type of language, right? Like all these memes,
Mm,
you know, all this like short slang words that are describing little things, right?
mm.
So um,
I see. I see. Well, I mean, yeah, that's also the evolution of language as well.
yeah,
Yeah, it makes sense what you're saying.
yeah. So
We were talking
so
about this
I
the other day, right? It reminds me of
yeah
that one time when I said, "While compulsory education is good, but a consequence of compulsory education is sort of this watering down from the standardization of the
mhm,
knowledge that we're supposed to get."
yeah yeah
And who
yeah
said these things,
that's true.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So like
So
we're supposed to learn these levels of math and
yeah.
geography. Well, what about Ptolemy? Do we ever read about him? Unless we're taking, English
Right.
literature, AP
Right.
English literature for 2 semesters, one
Yeah.
year out of your entire
Yeah.
educational career.
Yeah. I think I embarked on this, and then I read. even further. And yeah, Adler, um, he was an American like educator who kind of composed together what you call like the great books of Western civilization. So I think
Mm,
it's like a 60 book collection where he has like a piece of the material from like different eras, like
mm,
right, like the Greek era, Roman era,
mm-hmm.
the Middle Age, the Renaissance, um, the colonization to all the way to like the modern American literature, right?
Okay.
So and I realized, wow, this is like a gold mine, and I realized like self education is so important, and I feel like this is like what you need to understand or have at least kind of have an understanding before you can even like talk about politics or science or war, anything, right? So
Yeah.
that's been my discovery. Yeah, I was like,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the unfortunate thing about a lot of the commentators uh, and debaters that we have in media right now. Is like a bunch of people have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. I mean, sure they have some idea, but most of
yeah,
that is coming from whatever sort of echo chamber material that they get
yeah,
from their camp. And
yeah,
it's not because they've explored, like it's not because they've read through many of the classics and have actually thought about society as a whole, has thought
yeah,
about societal structures and the kind of
yeah.
effects that different policies might have. So that makes sense. Yeah, it's
I
definitely
think,
true that a more well-read person would be more capable in having a
yeah,
intellectual discussion.
but in a sense, it's again, it's not very sexy to like um be so literate about all these things, right? So it doesn't really
I
sell
guess so. I mean,
nowadays, right?
I I, I think some
Which
people would
which
find it
but
sexy.
but the thing is, I mean, it's easier to sell sex than books, right?
Oh yeah,
You know what
that's
I
why
mean?
porn is so big on the internet.
Right. But I think what the trend is that people are getting sick of not knowing,
Mm.
if that makes sense. Because I think the trend is that people are gonna want to know more about this. There's like this conscious awakening happening
Mm.
in the internet, right? There's like this like
Okay,
relative
like this
wokeness.
intellectual awakening.
Yeah. So people are craving, but they don't know what they're craving. So I think once they like it took me a while to discover like these things. So I think part of it is that people are not discovering these things early enough and even or too early that they kind of disregard it for a while. And they're not at the level of intellectual to understand when they read it, right? So
Mm.
um,
It takes practice to read some of the classics, especially if you want to read it in like maybe the original translation or something. Yeah,
right.
it's hard.
And it's kind of crazy because like there's all this technical um, infrastructure in how the literature was developed. During the Renaissance and like the whole Shakespearean era.
Mm.
This was like the tech boom of that age, right? When you're
Oh,
walking
I see. In the
across,
Renaissance.
yeah,
Okay.
when you're
Yeah.
when you're walking across the European streets, everybody was talking about how they're gonna be a poet or like a drama or a
Mm.
writer because that was a new thing and it was like making so much money, right? Like somebody was
Mm.
making a lot of money writing one bomb poem, right?
Mm.
So and then they had to develop this new technology in writing. I forgot what it was called, but like a dialectal hexagram or something. So in like Greek, you have a system way like every line has like the 6 beats, and within each beat is like 3 syllables, right? So you read in such a way, like something, something,
Oh, like
something.
a cadence to the
Yeah,
poem. I
yeah,
see.
or
It's
like
like
a
a
play.
structure that they follow.
Yeah.
Ah.
So there's all this like art and things involved. So like if you don't understand this and start reading those books, it'll be very difficult to read it because it just won't flow and you won't understand it right. So
Mm.
um yeah, there's definitely a need of like basic understanding of a lot of things actually to get to that level. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the meta game. There's a meta game. Everybody wants to get to the meta, but realize that it's a sequential type of thing. You have to get step by step.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I definitely see the value in reading a lot of the classics and a lot of the important books that are passed down because they withstood the passage of time.
Yeah.
I bet there are a lot of other books that were written and distributed in the past,
Yeah.
but the ones that we're hearing about now and the ones that are still being read now are the ones that are so insightful and valuable that they survived for thousands of years. Being well read is really important, especially in these important texts. Like if we put it into the context of like top politics that we were talking about earlier, someone might be. Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just in case the audio is gone out. Okay.
No, I was just like looking up because I just bought a book because a lot of the authors use um like previous literature as a example of context, right? And then a lot of times American authors use the Greek mythology as an example to describe, certain situations as like a lot of people use Bible. So, probably like majority of the people nowadays have no idea how to organize and categorize the gods and the characters of the Greek mythology. So
Mm,
when I learned that, I just ordered a book called Bullfinch's Mythology,
mm,
which I'll put a link on the description.
mm-hmm.
Which like this author kind of organized all of the Greek god and like their stories into a
I
single book.
see.
So then you can have
Okay.
some understanding, like when you read or take any content. A lot of like speakers they use that as well, right? So I think it's a good
Use like
backbone
Greek
to have.
mythology.
Yeah, like characters, referring to
Mm,
Shakespeare or um,
I see.
like
To give people more context into what they're talking
right,
about. Yeah.
yeah,
Provided that they know these references, right? The audience would have to understand like the
yeah,
different characters in Shakespearean plays
yeah,
or
yeah,
Greek mythology to be able to know what the speaker is talking about.
yeah,
I mean, mythology is interesting.
yeah. I
It's
mean, in a sense,
kind
people are
of
getting. You could either call bullshit on the guy if he's just like using big words, or like
mm,
everybody's just getting sold on it because he's just throwing up like a bunch of different Greek names and mythology and
hmm.
stories. It's just like
Well, the
selling.
Western culture is familiar with a lot of Greek mythology.
Right, right.
One way or another, somehow, I like. I just grew up hearing stories about it, and
Yeah, I mean, we
it's
came
interesting
from.
because it's
We're
a projection
descendants
of
of.
human beings, right? It's a
Yeah,
projection of us in mythological stories.
yeah, exactly.
So, and that I guess that's why it can be very compelling and it makes sense and it resonates with people, so that the
Yeah,
stories get retold. So that's
right.
the interesting part.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Um. Okay. Yeah. So earlier when we were talking about politics, it's
yeah,
like when someone's not well read, right? They just pick a side. They would really not have a good basis and they wouldn't have a good foundation to really have a more well-rounded position to consider policy from, and which is unfortunate, and it would be even more unfortunate if they go out and are really vocal about whatever i guess I guess random thing that they've decided to land on and go full force in, because maybe that person, say hypothetically that person has always thought, oh, capitalism is great, is the best thing ever because it promotes productivity and optimization and is great. And then what if that person starts reading into things and read, say, Karl Marx's Communism Manifesto. And it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I was a little bit wrong about capitalism. Maybe communism has some truths in it. And starts thinking in that direction and becoming more socialist. And then he reads like Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, and then thinks, oh shit, maybe not. Maybe communism is going to bring everything down. And then, and with that sort of internal debate and discussion, this person can have a much better constructed an argument into whatever he or she decides to argue for in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they've consumed all these important materials from the past that were really insightful for the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And
I
I
should really
think
read up on a lot of those because I don't usually read those kinds of books.
no, really, I feel like if we read these books and we understand the fundamental um like intellect that kind of governs our world, or how our world, like the Western civilization, is built on, then there's no way we cannot succeed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because several authors talk about how like these books, they're like a history, a record of all the things that are already happening in the world. So there's a pattern in in our world. Nothing's ever new, right? It all comes down to the basis of the human nature. Like this world is built by humans, and the humans always repeat themselves, right? War, anger, emotions, despair,
Mm-hmm.
love, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever the new trend is, whatever, like if it's technology, social media, or whatever, the the fundamental basis of why that's happening will be the same. It'll be just a different topic, you know.
Hmm.
So the way you can make the money in the area, it's gonna be the same, right? So once
Okay.
you understand that core meta, then you can use that knowledge to make money in any industry that pops up, right? And then you can understand how the market's gonna flourish and like die out, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's a small bubble, big bubble.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay, so like it doesn't matter like what the industry is, or not doesn't matter as much what the industry is or what the thing is.
yeah,
It follows a certain pattern because the underlying structure is very similar.
yeah, right. Because it's all
Okay.
gonna be built by human people, and the human
Mm,
psychology and their nature works the same way, right?
mm.
So
Makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That makes
yeah.
sense.
It was a very interesting way to look at it. I was like, whoa. But to understand that point of view, or even get that side, you know, vision, you need to be well, um, well read, I guess, in a sense. You have to understand the all these books and what they talk about as a fundamental structure. Like again, mapping out different
Mm,
experiences of why things are happening, right? So then you can
mm.
understand why things are happening nowadays. Why are the
Okay.
political movement happening, right?
Yeah.
Because it's
Understand
not the
more about psychology and human
yeah,
motivation.
yep,
Hmm.
yeah. So I think that kind of ties it into the meta game and the Mula game of our
Mm.
podcast, right? So
True.
yeah, so I
Yeah,
think I think
understanding these trends so that we can ride the wave
yeah,
in a way.
yeah. And what's crazy, I you mentioned the whole practice that you had in elementary school or
Mm.
high school.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I've begun to read the book The Wealth of Nation, which is like part of the Great Book series. And in the first chapter, he talks about like that specific experience. It's like, oh, why did some people become wealthy, and what defines wealth? And he started like explaining the industrial revolution and how systemizing and automating these tasks will improve the wealth of factories and nations. And it's
Mm.
very interesting, and it only makes sense to do it that way, right? If that makes sense to increase your wealth. So there's no
Mm.
reason to fold one by one for each person anymore, right? So those are like a very simple example of what that fundamental knowledge is to becoming successful in the meta game that we're talking about, right? But there's like a bigger meta fundamentals that you would see to like understand the boom of like tech market or social media market. Like how is this boom affecting the social dynamics and things like that, right? And they can kind of conceive the outcome of it because you read so many stories in the historical context, what these events kind of how they played out, right? Yeah. So then it'll be interesting just to kind of observe it from there. Like you won't be so anxious about like missing out. Like there's not gonna be a fear of missing out on crypto trend, right? But you'll be so like intrigued by just observing the trend because it's like following the same fundamental principles that you've been reading about, right? And then from the observation, you can test out a couple of things that you want to test out. Oh, this guy made money here. Maybe I should try putting it. And if it works, it's just like, oh, it'll be very, very interesting just to
it's like
see
confirmation
the outcome
of what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, you learn like, okay, this doesn't work in this context.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. I was gonna say something. Forgot. Oh. Just had it. Oh well. It'll come back to me.
I see. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, right. I got it back. So yeah, when you're talking about the metagame, it makes sense. And the metagame is not a static state. Right? It's always moving because more and more people are going to figure this out eventually.
Yeah, right.
And more adoption leads to more innovation and advancement, and there's already going to be a new type of metagame, and there's different levels above that.
Yeah.
So
and that's why it's so important
you always have to be
to
learning and moving and observing everything in your environment.
Right. Yeah. But I think the authors were saying basically like all the meta so things are built on top of this historical context and like the discoveries of like Aristotle and Plato and the psychologists, right? So what's happening in the meta nowadays is like the utilization of these studies, right? Right. So the faster you understand, get this like fundamental in your library, then the more you're gonna be able to like navigate through the changes in the future, I think. So yeah, I put that as my new goal to read pretty much all of the great books. Even though I did see that there is like a gap. There's a huge gap between the 12th century and like the 14th century literature, but I think it's still a good place to start to get your fundamental.
I wonder why that is. That's like 200 years.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think that's I think he took it out because that was like the era where the literature was becoming like a little bit more too imaginative. Like I think like that's like where like Beowulf and all this like scientific fiction kind of novels kind of came out. So I think that's the reason why this author kind of took it out. But nevertheless, it's like a good building block of like the Western books, right?
I see. Yeah. What do you think would be the newest addition to that list, like of modern day future classic Harry Potter?
Oh, Harry Potter definitely would be a series that would go in there. I don't know. I haven't read the whole Harry Potter series yet. Actually,
in terms of books, it's like it's impacted an entire generation.
Right. For sure, that definitely deserves to be on that list. Right. So yeah, I wanna make this my goal to read all that book, and I think it's gonna take us several like maybe almost a decade to maybe properly read and understand these books.
Yeah.
So
some of these books are quite challenging.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm Yeah, no.
Even though I
I'm
feel a little bit
nowhere near
overwhelmed.
capable.
Yeah, I
I
feel
tried
like
I tried when I visited Portland, the Power Books, the big ass bookstore in Portland.
mhm,
I bought a few books, and one of them was Immanuel Kant's Critique the Pure Reason. And
mm,
I tried reading it for like 2 pages. I couldn't get through that. It was so
yeah,
difficult.
yeah. No, there was a couple of books that I also attempted without knowing that was on this
Mm,
list,
mm,
and I couldn't get through a few pages either. It's
mm-hmm.
really hard. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing the progress and like this development of myself as I go through these books. I'm very excited actually, like more than being like overwhelmed or kind of
Mm.
like that. Like it's like something to look forward to. I think more and more I feel like it's like the best form of like entertainment, just like discovering these
Uh,
topics and reading about it.
okay.
Yeah, because it's like
I see.
I kind of use this analogy a lot. It's when you're younger, you think new music or new song is like the newest song that your favorite artist released, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But really, in a meta, any new music is any new music you discover, like classic or
Mm.
violin or concerto, right? Because you've never heard of it before. That the type of music is new to you, right?
Oh
And
yeah, it's still new.
yeah, it's
Yeah, in
very
that
new to you,
context.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
because like if you've been listening to hip hop for 10 years, like you have no idea what like pop sounds like or like classic sounds like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like oh,
Yeah. Yeah. The
or what jazz sounds like, blues sounds like,
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it's a lot of people only stick to a couple of genres. Some only listen to one, which is it's unfortunate. Music is wonderful. I mean, music is my whole thing.
mhm.
So yeah, like I love all genres.
Yeah, we can get
Well,
deeper into
almost
that
all
topic
genres. Yeah.
next time. Yeah, so
Next
much things
time,
to talk about, but
so much thing.
yeah,
Oh, when you said the word entertainment earlier,
yeah,
when you were talking about reading books and being excited, uh, that somehow has sparked this massive like thought in my head, like this giant rabbit hole. Not a rabbit hole, but a thought process in my head, linking back to like an hour ago when you were talking about how people nowadays don't read these books anymore.
hmm,
People nowadays, we just get through high school, maybe college, and learn more or less the same things, and they're all pretty shallow, basic knowledge, and we don't dig deep into literature and these nuggets that we can find in these classic books.
hmm,
When you said entertainment, it's like I'm thinking maybe because nowadays we just have too much shit in our
yeah,
lives that's
yeah,
entertainment, like YouTube, Netflix, and all the social media apps. You're like on IG for 2 hours every day.
yeah,
There's too much indulgence into dopamine fueled outlets for
yeah,
distraction. So, and back in the day, there's like not much to do. If you didn't have to work because you own a farm, or you just have stacks on stacks, then it's really exciting for a person to go and explore chemistry and do experiments and figure out principles.
yeah,
I
right.
think because these people are, when they're wealthy, they're educated, and a lot of educated people are super curious. I mean, curiosity is a really strong human trait.
Yeah, I think the pretty much like the itching your curiosity is the
Mm.
best form of education, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And for me, it is deeply satisfying to to dive into my curiosities,
yeah,
to be able to explore. Okay, not maybe not dive in right away, but to be able to explore whatever my curiosity takes me, and once I find something that I resonate really well with, and diving into that, having the space and the ability to do that is really important for me.
I see.
Yeah,
Cool. Yeah.
and I think that's one thing I think is really fundamental in having a well-rounded life for me and fulfilling life for me is
Yeah.
to satisfy this
Yeah.
curiosity for me.
Me too. I think that's why I feel so happy when I discovered this book
Mm,
series, because
mm,
like I'm always kind of confused and questioning things, and I feel like it's
mm,
the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't understand. And
mm,
I'm like, oh, and this author and the people are telling me, you to understand, you should read these because these people centuries ago had the same questions that you had, and they took a lot of time to like, write down their discoveries, and these are the words that were proven through time that, withstood the time,
mm,
right? So it's
mm,
like, here is what you need to know, and then you can start discovering more thoughts on top of that.
mm.
So, yeah,
Very
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
We'll put that list down in the description so that everybody
yeah,
else can
yeah,
see the list.
for sure. Yeah, cool. So I think, yeah, we're just about um an hour and a few minutes past.
Okay,
So I
cool.
think this is a good place to end it here,
Hmm.
right? So,
Yeah,
um,
really good discussions today.
yeah, that was very very fun.
And we don't talk about politics that much, right? In our usual discussions, sometimes,
I
but
don't.
not a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was fun to think about some ideas
yeah,
and
yeah.
discuss
So
with you.
yeah, let
Hmm.
us know what you guys thought about our thoughts, and if you have different views, let us know why, and leave a comment below. Drop a like, subscribe if you like our podcast, and see you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks, folks.